So today we've got some Russians panicking as Ukrainian forces go on the attack, with one saying, quote, "The front line in the Zaporizhzhia region began to collapse. It can now be definitively said that the disconnection of Starlink indeed led to a complete loss of coordination on the ground." Now, collapse is probably a bit strong of a word to describe what's happening here, but by all accounts, Ukrainian forces are certainly on the move in that direction. Now, starting with a look at the map to give you an idea of the area we're talking about, as we zoom in here, Zaporizhzhia front in the southern portion. A lot of operations in recent weeks have been in the Zaporizhzhia and Pokrovsk area here. If we move southwest, we get into the area where the operations in the last couple days have taken place, specifically this pocket here. And this is notable. It's probably not going to come through on the screen all that well, but this little pocket right here is territory inside the Dnipro that is currently held by Russia. So down here you've got Zaporizhzhia, over here you've got Donetsk. This is the Dnipro, and there is an argument that this offensive is focused on clearing Russian forces out of this little pocket of the oblast right here. Either way, Russian media Rybar says, quote, "The enemy is launching counterattacks, seeking to buy time to strengthen their defensive line between Pokrovsk and Velikonovoselka." So zooming up or moving up a little bit here, they're talking about Ukraine conducting attacks in this region to try to reinforce this line here. They say on the northern flank of the direction, battles continued in the vicinity of Ternova. So we'll zoom in a little bit to give you an idea of the area they're talking about here. So Ternova right here. And we are starting to see a bit of an update on Deep State map showing a change of territorial control in the gray zone. They say some time ago, the enemy launched an attack with armored vehicles through the gray zone in the fields west of the village. Ukrainian forces managed to land and plant a flag, but later the group was hit by drones and artillery. Currently, the western outskirts of the settlement remain in the gray zone. The enemy retains the ability to transfer small infantry groups here, which, despite losses, slow down the Russian armed forces' advance. So when we're looking on the map, again, this is kind of the key area that we're seeing a couple different Russian accounts talk about. Ternova, Berezov, and then a bit of a push here from the west. So this is kind of the focus of operations in the area. Again, I think it's a bit of a stretch, but some Ukrainian or some Russian accounts starting to panic about a collapse at the front. I don't think that's exactly what we're seeing here. Russian analyst 2 Majors says the enemy is making suicidal attempts to break through to the depth of the defense at the junction of the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipro regions. The enemy concentrated assault and airborne units, and they list off a bunch here, saying the 1st, 5th, 33rd, 210th, 215th, and 425th Assault Regiments, as well as the 92nd Assault Brigade, 82nd, and 95th Airborne Assault Brigades. I haven't seen evidence of any of these units yet being utilized. You kind of got to dig through a couple channels to find any pictures or videos coming out from the Ukrainian side, but certainly nothing showing every one of those units being used in this direction, but maybe. They say over the past few days, these fire brigades made several attempts to break through our rear in 2 conditional directions. They call out again Ternova and Berezov right here. And something I want to point out when we go over to the Syriac map, again, this is a map that tends to be much more favorable for Russian reports. And when we zoom into the area here, you'll see that Ternova and Berezov are down here. They have the Russian line of control all the way up to the river. So if we use I don't think this one has a ruler, does it? No. If we go over to Deep State map where we do have a ruler, according to that map then, you're talking about a 9 to 10 kilometer push through Russian lines. So, while here it might look like a relatively short distance, according to Russian sources, this would be a 10-kilometer push into Russian-controlled territory. They say the sole purpose of such actions is to plant flags and subsequent media statements about the return of control along the administrative border of the 2 regions. Again, focused on exactly where this sits in terms of it being part of the Dnipro rather than some sort of strategic or operationally significant terrain. 2 Majors continues by saying the enemy's tactic is to send in 3 to 4 vehicles at a time, but that does not bring tangible results. Over the past week, 4 such attacks were recorded. The enemy continues attempts to break through using the warming and impenetrable fog, not sparing either equipment or personnel. They say the number of destroyed Ukrainian vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and tanks has already exceeded several dozen, and the number of decimated infantry confirmed by objective control footage has exceeded 100. we have already started to see a fair amount of footage coming out from this direction. From what I've seen at this point, I don't know that I could get to dozens of Ukrainian vehicles destroyed and hundreds of personnel killed, but no doubt there have been, again, documented on video, Ukrainian armored assaults happening in this direction. Unfortunately, one of them did not look like it took place in the fog or in conditions where drones couldn't fly, and it does look like, at least in one of these, that they were spotted a long ways back, which of course is the challenge of putting together any sort of offensive operations on a battlefield this saturated with drone coverage. Sticking with the Russian assessments here, Yuri Podyolka, a Russian mill blogger quoted by Noel Reports on X, said the situation on the Zaporizhzhia front has sharply heated up over the past couple days. He said that Ukrainian forces have launched active counterattacks in the area of Huliopoli. Now, we'll zoom out here a little bit to show you the area where this is taking place. So we're talking about up here in the Dnipro direction. This Russian mill blogger is talking about active Ukrainian counterattacks further to the southwest. I've not seen this verified anywhere else. This is one account talking about this. It's a big account, more than 1 million followers, stays pretty up to speed, generally pretty reliable in tracking frontline movements. He's the only one right now I'm seeing talking about a Ukrainian counterattack in Huliopoli. He claims these actions were not spontaneous. In his view, the operation had been prepared for about a week, during which the Ukrainian command concentrated significant forces for the push. He says the counteroffensive involves 7 assault regiments and 3 assault brigades, all redeployed from the Pokrovsk and Kupiansk directions. He said that Ukrainian forces are trying to exploit logistical routes and nodes, emphasizing that the timing of the attacks coincided with difficult weather conditions and Starlink problems, which he said helped increase the element of surprise. So again, just a couple days ago, we got news that the United States I guess it wasn't the United States that did it. It was Starlink, SpaceX, Elon Musk that shut off Russia's ability to use their Starlink terminals. And you got some, they are off. Okay, so there's some disruptions happening in Ukraine, no doubt. There's a whitelist put together by the Ukrainian defense minister. They submitted that to SpaceX and essentially said any terminal on this list is okay. If they're not on this list, not okay. And they shut everything else off. And I have seen zero evidence at this point that any terminals in Russia's possession are functional. They're putting out posts of how to use their Starlink terminals as cutting boards and extra, jokingly, of course, but extra protection from drones. They're completely useless. So we talked about it in that video discussing the shutdown of the Starlink terminals. There is going to be some effect. The comparison I made, whether this was spot on or not, was if your cell phone stopped functioning entirely today and everybody's cell phones stopped. That's how reliant Russia has been on Starlink. They do have other means of communication, but nothing is as reliable or as convenient or, to a degree, even as secure as Starlink. So if you right now finish watching this video and your cell phone just didn't function, no texts, no calls, no emails at all, just completely off. It's a brick. It's a paperweight, as is everyone else's in the world. You could still function, but everything would become more complicated. And there would be a learning curve of trying to get your backup communications set up, getting that hardline telephone installed in your house or whatever it might be. That is what we're seeing right now in the Russian military. It should not be a shock that Ukraine used that period of time, this ongoing period of time, to take advantage of that and carry out some sort of offensive operation. Continuing on here with Podyolka, he says fighting, he adds, is now continuing around Berezov. So moving on, again, that's the second account we have that the fighting is taking place down here, which according to Russian sources would be 10 kilometers from the front line. He said the area around Berezov remains contested, and further west near Ternova, so we'll zoom out a little bit here to give you this area. Wait, I had it a second ago. Oh, here we go. Ternova here, so in this general direction moving west. He says the situation in this area is unstable. He says Ukrainian forces are continuing to move in this direction while both sides assess developments differently, suggesting that the battle for initiative in this sector is still ongoing. Now, the kind of most freak out that I saw on the Russian side was from a mill blogger, Alex Parker, who published this map here that I'll share with you guys, saying, quote, following the Dnipro region, the front line in the Zaporizhzhia region has begun to collapse. It can now be definitively stated that the disconnection of Starlink indeed led to a complete and total loss of coordination on the ground. Finally, other astute bloggers have noticed the catastrophe that is happening right now on the Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia fronts, and the reason is correctly stated. It's precisely the disconnection of Starlink. A map of the Ukrainian counteroffensive that this is the one he's showing here. The fog and disruption of Starlink are aiding the offensive. The Ukrainians have definitely reached Ternova. Damn it. So again, that area, according to Russian mappers, is 10 kilometers from the front line. That is pretty significant. We generally don't see 10-kilometer pushes in any direction. I should stress, as we get into the Ukrainian assessments here, I think we're a long ways away from saying that Ukraine has full control over that area. We have just seen too many times, especially in recent months, small assault groups moving forward, and all of a sudden that area goes from controlled to gray, or from controlled by one side to controlled to the other. So very much fog of war type situation right now, but we should have more information here in the coming days. Now, a couple quick notes that I wanted to share with you guys. Fundraiser update. You guys are knocking this out of the park. So we teamed up with Car for Ukraine. This is going to be going on all year. So we've got a big campaign to provide vehicles to the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade's Seraphim drone unit. They're taking a drone company, turning them into a battalion. We together are providing them trucks for that battalion. So we've already hit 54,000 euros out of a 97,000 euro goal. So we're well on our way. This thing, I think it's less than a week old. That's how fast this is moving. But I get it, because these patches are like really cool, right? A couple different patches based off of the level you give. And we coordinated this week, or confirmed this week, it's cumulative. So if you give, let's say, over the course, get to 500 euros or $590 over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 donations, you qualify for this patch. So just so you know, the team at Car for Ukraine is doing all that behind the scenes. Of course, you big rollers, high rollers out there, put your name or a logo, your sports team, picture your dog, a nice message to friends and family on the side of a truck, 2,500 euros. But either way, that one is moving along. It'll be linked in the description and pinned comment below. I also wanted to say we did a video yesterday, kind of a follow-up, a roll-up of my time in Ukraine from a couple weeks ago. I'll have that linked in the description below. It's a longer video than normal, about 45 minutes, but it walks through handing off equipment to a number of Ukrainian units, visiting a couple of drone positions, FPV and UGVs, drone manufacturing facilities, meeting with some senior leadership in the Ukrainian military, and then just being able to spend time with the awesome people that are out there fighting day in and day out. So if interested, that video will be linked in the description as well. Now, turning to the Ukrainian side here, some assessments of what they are seeing. And we've actually got the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Southern Defense Forces saying the maps drawn by the Russians do not correspond to reality. Ukrainian soldiers are conducting reconnaissance and search operations and mop-up actions. And from a military point of view, these actions do not constitute a counteroffensive. In fact, it's true. There are no large-scale breakthroughs tens of kilometers into the enemy's defenses. It's just a significant improvement in the tactical situation and the elimination of tactical vulnerabilities through mop-up actions and local offensive operations in that direction. Now, that first assessment, or that assessment there, I came across on Plyfra's Telegram channel. I'll link their account both on X and Telegram in the description below. Great resource when you're trying to follow what's happening here. But coming from Ukraine, the official statement right now is these are mop-up operations, very similar in a lot of ways to what we see north of Pokrovsk and even in Pokrovsk to a degree, and certainly further out in Kupiansk. So I think that's probably what we're seeing right now, that Russia once again got out a little ahead of themselves and claimed some areas under their control that really were not. And just with a limited offensive push, Ukraine is able to mop that up. And from the Russian point of view, they're panicking because they've been believing these exaggerated maps for months. So just moving through and clearing out a couple Russian forces makes it look like the entire line is collapsing, when in reality, it's just clearing out all of those 1, 2, 3, 4 Russian soldiers that are stationed a ways forward from the zero line. In fact, Malcontent News, another great publication, great resource in following the war, put together his assessment on this, saying, quote, "Despite videos showing that Russian troops did not consolidate any gains, some mappers still assess that the geolocation of any Russian soldier counts as a new advance. It doesn't matter if the soldiers are dead or living. Even if a video clearly shows them getting warheads on foreheads, it becomes 100% proof of consolidated gains. 8-kilometer advance, great victory. Book your hotel rooms in Zaporizhzhia now." He says there is not a collapse. The flag wavers and the pocket of scouts hiding in basements and frozen holes in the ground can no longer coordinate due to the loss of Starlink, so the truth is coming out. Russia's presence was always very limited in some of these areas. And I should note, he's actually talking specifically about an area even further west of here. So his Stepnorisk, I feel like I'm mispronouncing names left and right here. But in the farther west area of Zaporizhzhia is the area that Malcontent is talking about. But that same situation applies across the front. And it's what we saw in Kupiansk over the last 4 months, really, where it went from being, quote, completely under Russian control to, oh my God, it turns out they actually weren't there at all, and Ukraine was able to push them out with a dedicated offensive effort. That seems, at this point, what we're seeing play out in Zaporizhzhia right now. In fact, to that end, the 225th Assault Regiment put out this video just a few hours ago that does kind of line up with the idea that some of these elements are moving through, and I believe they're operated in Zaporizhzhia, and some of these elements are moving through and just capturing the lone Russians, capturing or killing the lone Russians that managed to sneak through Ukrainian lines. The 225th put out a pretty impressive message here saying, quote, "All Russians who surrender their weapons will be allowed to live. Our mission is to defend Ukraine. Yours is to survive and not let your commanders kill you. It is in our interest to replenish the exchange fund, not to bury your bodies in our land. There are already hundreds of thousands of them here." So again, based off of the reports that we're getting both from Russia and Ukraine, and now we've got some footage from the 225th that I believe is in that area, for what it's worth. I think they're operating closer to Huliopoli, but either way, that is likely what we're seeing play out in the Zaporizhzhia direction. So again, fog of war, very much the case right now. We'll have to give it a little bit more time before we can definitively say the extent of those operations. But either way, Ukraine does clearly seem to be taking advantage of the disruption in Russian communications. Now, we got a little bit of an update here in the Pokrovsk direction from a couple different sources, and it's overall not super positive, depending, looking at a couple different ones here. Deep State Map said, quote, "The enemy is moving its infantry into the northern portions of Pokrovsk." And in this footage, you can see how the Russians, I'm of course not going to show this part of the footage, disguised in civilian clothes are removing the bodies of their dead soldiers. They say the entry into the city is severely restricted. I'm going to shift over to a satellite map. I think it's a little better when getting into kind of the weeds here in Pokrovsk. The enemy activity is conducting remote mine laying. The areas that are cleared of mines are immediately mined again by the enemy. There are also constant attempts by the enemy to enter Hershny, again, just to the northwest of Pokrovsk. And recently, the pilots have been focusing more on this populated area rather than Pokrovsk, which the enemy is taking advantage of. So as Ukrainian drone pilots try to keep Russian forces out of Hershny, it opens up a bit of a corridor for Russia to move forces further north and further entrench in Pokrovsk. They also talked up here to Radinsky, a bit to the north of Pokrovsk, saying, "Radinsky is increasingly coming into view, where the enemy is intensifying its pressure every day. However, the biggest problem is that the enemy is conducting raids with small groups of infantry to the west of Radinsky into the depths of our defense and searching for pilots. At the same time, Radinsky is the last populated area that allows attempts to exit Minograd, which the enemy understands very well." We've got another assessment from the 7th Rapid Response Corps talking about Minograd, but this is a tough area right here, no doubt, for Ukraine at this point. It does look like a lot of this is still contested. I don't know even the estimates of Ukrainian forces that remain holding some of this ground, or if it's entirely held in some cases with drones. But what we're seeing Russia do, and you can start to see it mapping out a little bit here to the north, is pushing west of Radinsky and reducing this pocket to where it's harder and harder, to the point eventually, should this continue, where it's impossible for Ukraine to get anything in or anyone out of this pocket. The 7th Rapid Response Corps, talking to specifically the situation here in Minograd, said, quote, "Over the past week, the operational situation in Minograd has significantly deteriorated. The main efforts to contain the further advance of the enemy are focused on the northern outskirts, where active combat operations are ongoing. To implement the plan to occupy the city, the enemy is bringing heavy equipment, including artillery, into the central part of the town. At the same time, the activity of Russian assault groups in the eastern outskirts is also being observed. The enemy's pressure north of the city is significantly limiting the possibility of using unmanned aerial systems in Minograd itself. This, in turn, narrows the opportunities for fire impact on the enemy. In the face of a deteriorating situation, the 79th Separate Airborne Assault Tavria Brigade carried out search and strike operations north of Minograd to detect and eliminate enemy groups, thus prevented the Russians from entering the rear of our positions." So that's going to be the focus in this area for a little while now. I'd be surprised to hear that Ukraine is pulling forces from Pokrovsk right now. I know that was one of the assessments put out by two majors, is that they're pulling from Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. Both of those fights are very much still ongoing, kind of hanging in the balance. Be surprising if Ukraine decided to draw down in those two sectors, especially right now as we are watching Russia try to seal off this pocket. And we've already had a couple Russian mill bloggers start talking about the next steps of this offensive. I think it's, just like saying the front in Zaporizhzhia has collapsed. I think Russia talking about what comes after the capture of Pokrovsk is a bit premature as well, as there's still, by most accounts, still very heavy, very active fighting happening in Pokrovsk itself, albeit on the northern outskirts. But either way, we should expect to see a continued Russian push to try to seal off this pocket and eventually be able to focus a little more further north and west as they want to push into Ukrainian territory. But that's all we got for now. Again, for those interested in the fundraiser or the video documenting my time in Ukraine a few weeks ago, all of that will be in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.